Hi, so in this lesson we're going to have a look at what is crime. We're going to address some of the causes of crime with a bit of a focus on non-sociological explanations. The purpose of looking at non-sociological explanations is that you can draw on these across all of the topics in crime and deviance to be able to evaluate some of the sociology theories that we look at. So, for example, when we're looking at functionalism or Marxism, feminism and so on, you'll be able to draw on the idea of other explanations from outside of sociology as your evaluation points to give weaknesses of each of the sociology theories. So what is crime? If you can make a note of the definition. So a definition provided by Pease in 1994 is that crime comprises of actions which are deemed so damaging to society that there must be a direct role in, first of all, identifying them, so labelling them as criminal offences, for example, through the law, and then acting against the perpetrator, so punishment through the criminal justice system for those individuals who commit crime. So overall, it's a behaviour which breaks the laws of a particular society. So again, you must remember that laws are different across different societies and that laws change over time. So one thing can be a crime at one point in history and then this can change and not be a crime into the future. Criminal behaviour often results in action being taken by the formal agencies of social control that we looked at in the last lesson. This can be anything like being arrested for shoplifting. Drinking alcohol in Saudi Arabia is illegal. So again, that's an example of how crime is different across different societies and so on. There are many forms of crime that we will look at throughout the topic of crime and deviance. Street crime is sort of the first thing that comes to most people's minds. So assault, mugging, murder, theft and so on. But there are multiple other explanations of crime that we're going to have a look at. So we look at corporate crime, we look at green crime, and we look at things like human rights as we look at the sort of concept of crime, what is crime and what is deviant. So the first thing I'd like you to do is take a bit of a pause on the video and have a look at the task that you've got in your booklets. So this is getting back to domestic violence in the family topic. With crime and deviance, you will need to start drawing on links from family and education in particular, and be able to draw together some of that information that you've already learnt and how that links into the crime and deviance topic. So in this particular bit, I want you to have a look at how the announcement for a new form of crime was brought in to do with coercive and controlling behaviour within the remit of domestic abuse. So you might want to recap on your domestic violence section. I want you to have a think about how the article shows that crime is socially constructed. So this is the idea that crime changes over time. So the fact that you can bring in a new form of crime for a behaviour that has existed prior to that piece of legislation, how does that show you that crime is something that is constructed by society? I want you to have a think about proving that a criminal offence has taken place in this particular example. So how do you prove coercive and controlling behaviours? Why is that difficult? And how might that cause a problem in terms of prosecution and charges for this particular criminal act? And then I'd like you to have a think of other deviant behaviour that perhaps we accept in society at the moment, but may well, or you think should, become a crime going into the future. It's quite easy to look back at deviant behaviour and see why it's no longer a crime, so things like homosexuality. But what happens now that you think actually this should be a criminal offence, this should become a crime, or it might become a crime going forward? So pause the recording and read the extracts and answer those questions. So we're going to have a look at reasons why people commit crime, and a lot of these, as I've said, will focus on non-sociological explanations. At this point, if you do both psychology and sociology, some of these may be familiar with you, and it might be worth buddying up with people who don't do psychology as well, and you can have a chat about some of the theories that we will come across. So the idea of looking at why people commit crime from non-sociological explanations is to give you those evaluation points, but also to give you that broader understanding that theories of crime are not solely confined to the realms of sociology. Crime is something that a lot of people try to explain. Sociologists take a wider, more social perspective, but other theories do actually look at differences within an individual and how somebody themselves is different to other people in society. These assumptions about a criminal being different do come into the ideas of functional and new right explanations of criminal behaviour as well. So it's very useful to have this background understanding that allows you to see where some of the sociological theories are coming from when they're explaining criminal behaviour. So what we're going to do is you're going to have a look through the information provided on page 11 and 12 in your booklets, and I'm going to provide you with extra points and some video clips on the following slides. All of that brought together, I'd like you to produce a summary poster that outlines the non-sociological explanations of criminal behaviour. Don't know if you can remember back to LE3, and there's some posters on the wall that are examples of these. But what I would like you to do is to do this as part and parcel of like a revision summary of why people commit crime. So you're going to include the information in your booklets, the information on the following slides, and the videos that support them. And you can also add your own research to this poster. You might want to look at sort of deviations from the content that we're looking at, things like people's personality, genetics, testosterone, hormones, aggression, psychological theories, and so on. So you can add whatever you like and whatever sort of catches your interest to your poster as well. So we're going to have a look first of all at what we call social learning theory. So this theory is based around the idea that within society there are role models, and a role model is someone who an individual has observed and identifies with in some particular way. So it's usually similar age, similar gender. There's something about that particular role model that the observer thinks, oh, I'd like to be like them, or I like what they're doing, or they're gaining some status that I want to gain from that particular behaviour. Role models when it comes to criminality are what we would normally determine as poor role models, because they're not showing desirable behaviour, they're showing undesirable behaviour. Once you've observed that undesirable behaviour, the process of modelling leads to observational learning. So the role model will commit an offence, they will behave in a particularly antisocial or deviant way, and the modelling of that behaviour is then learnt by the individual observing what that person is doing. In order to go through that process, the individual needs to be able to pay attention to the role model, and that's something that must occur sort of more than once, really. So it might be somebody that they're consistently exposed to, a parent, an older brother, somebody with status in a peer group, and it can include media role models as well. Once you've paid attention to that role model acting out that behaviour, you retain that in your memory. So you have a store of the behaviour that you have seen, and then you're able to reproduce that behaviour of your own accord. So for example, you might see an older sibling that you look up to shoplifting when you're out and about. You may then remember what they did, remember that they got a reward for it, so they got the stuff that they wanted, and then when you're out and about you may then commit shoplifting as an offence. The main area of research in this is a guy called Bandura, particularly a study that he did in 1961. which looked at aggression. So children who observed aggressive role models mimicked that behaviour and copied that behaviour in their own actions. And obviously aggression and violence is one of the main areas which tend to lead to criminality and antisocial actions. This links into the idea of the role of the media, which is sort of heavily looked at within social learning theory. Role models are quite easily accessible via media platforms, especially in modern society when you've not only got television and films, but you've got social media, so Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so on. And that can lead to quite severe criminal and antisocial copycat behaviours. So, for example, there was a high school shooting, if you want to research a little bit more about this, called Columbine, where they replicated the behaviour of games console heroes, so to speak. So they replicated a game called Doom that they played, and they killed a number of people within their high school with weapons and bombs that they'd set up. But please bear in mind that this is, although supporting evidence and supporting examples, there is also research that suggests the media does not have a full effect on people's behaviour. So Charlton et al. Found that children didn't change their behaviour when exposed to the media and media violence. So it does happen, but perhaps there should also be other factors that are taken into account: a child's background, their upbringing, their experiences. For example, if you wanted to look at the Jamie Bulger case, that links to social learning theory, but also experiences of those children prior to that murder. So what I'd like you to have a look at is the video on the next slide. It gives an overview of a number of psychological reasons for criminality. So make some notes, see if there's anything else you want to investigate. The video will play automatically, but if you want to skip through it, it's available on Teams as well. So you can look at it in different orders. It's completely up to you. Slight change of plan with the video. Unfortunately, I can't get the videos to embed themselves into this presentation. So if you can pause the recording and go to Teams and watch the first non-sociological explanation of crime and deviance, and then come back to this point in the video, please. So we're going to have a look at the biological and personality explanations of criminal behaviour. As mentioned in the video that you've just watched, psychologists have attempted to explain criminal activity based on personality type, and also there's been development in areas of genetics and biological functioning. So the argument here is that crime and criminal behaviour may be a result of a fundamental biological difference between criminals and the average member of the population. Now, a number of pieces of research have argued that these things may lead to a higher predisposition, making it more likely, but quite often social factors must be in place to kind of trigger these kinds of behaviours. So it's not specifically the case that if you have any of these particular aspects that you will become a criminal. The general consensus is that it makes you more predisposed. So you've got things like the MAOA gene in aggressive behaviour. So there's research by McDermott et al. In 2008. The MAOA gene is also commonly known as the warrior gene, and this leads to higher levels of aggression in males because it's carried on the male chromosome. Equally, there are brain differences that have been found in people who have committed murder. So Rain et al. In 1997 did a study of murderers and found differences in their prefrontal cortex. So there are biological differences that could lead to crime and criminal behaviour. Eysenck researched personality types, and he looked at a number of ways in which different personality types and personality traits are often combined into a criminal activity. So he talks about extroversion, which is often lively, sociable, pleasure-seeking people, but when combined with instability in neuroticism and also high psychoticism, that can lead to a personality type that is more likely to be reckless or have a disregard for the social norms and conventions in society. Isaac talked about how his personality types had a connection to biological predeterminism, so genetic predispositions and brain functioning such as arousal and brain excitation are key features that underpin his explanation of what type of personality you actually find yourself to have. So the following video gives a brief summary of the MAOA warrior gene and how that is linked to criminality. So if you watch the video and make some notes, equally you can always skip through, and the video is also available on the team's site under criminal behaviour. And this is the second video that I would like you to watch. As per the other one, I can't get the video to embed and play itself within this recording. So if you could pause the lesson and go to Teams, watch the explanation of the MAOA gene and its link to crime and deviance, and then come back to the lesson at this point to go through the rest of the content. Another non-sociological explanation of the causes of crime relates to hormones. And again, this is mentioned in the first video that we watched, and it's predominantly connected to male aggression, although it can be found in female aggression. So one of the male hormones that is the main hormone for men is testosterone. Testosterone peaks in adolescence during puberty. It eventually sort of declines as men get older. The main purpose of testosterone is promoting muscle strength, but it's also implicated in aggression. Now, just because testosterone is the male hormone, women do have some elements of testosterone as well. We don't have as much, but it does tend to be slightly higher in women who perhaps are more competitive, take part in competitive sports and things like that. So it is naturally present in women, but we don't have it to the extreme levels that it's present in men. So the effect on women tends to be sort of traits of being action orientated, so focused on goals, achievements, being quite resourceful, quite powerful. The impact on women's physical aggression is sort of unsubstantiated, really, and women tend to be more verbally aggressive than physically aggressive in comparison to their male counterparts anyway. So research into hormones and testosterone as cause of crime. You have Dabbs in 1987, who looked at 8 to 9 male prisoners involved in violent and non-violent crime. And for those that were involved in violent crime, they found that they had higher levels of testosterone. Okay. And then Dabbs did further research in 1995 that looked at the type of crime men committed and studied 692 male prisoners. So it's a scientific study. He measured testosterone in their saliva, and he found that the higher levels of testosterone were in male criminals who committed things like murder and rape, and again indicating the link between the severity of crime and the level of testosterone. So you've had a correlation between increase in testosterone and increased severity of crime. Okay, correlation, if you remember from your research methods, is not a cause and effect. It just looks at whether two variables are connected, if they have some sort of relationship. And again, there are quite often other factors that are involved in leading to crime and criminal behaviour. But all of these do provide evaluations for your pure sociological explanations of crime and deviance, because it shows there are alternative ways of explaining why people commit crime. So, coming to the end of this particular section, you've got a review sheet, first of all. So get those key terms down. What does crime mean? What does deviance mean? And link back a little bit as well. We've talked about social construction in a number of different areas. What is social construction? So make sure you can determine that. That's quite important for when we get into labelling and interactionist theories of crime. Talk about the ways crime is socially constructed. So things like how laws change and the different ways in which crime is determined and deviance is determined. So things like context changes over time, who determines what is criminal and what is deviant. And then do a quick summary of why people commit crime. So you've got maternal deprivation. If you want to have a look at Bowlby's juvenile thieves study, that will help you with that. That's also summarised briefly in your booklets. Personality traits, which is Eysenck. Mental abnormality, which is looking at antisocial personality disorder, which is in your booklets, and you can research a little bit more about that. You've also got quick summaries for biological explanations, so Lombroso. Again, that's in your booklets. You can do a little bit more research on that. It's quite an unusual explanation of criminal behaviour, as it talks about how your facial features can indicate whether you're going to be a criminal or not. And it looks at body types and body shape. So that's quite outdated now, but it's very interesting to know where these kinds of explanations came from. And also look at your genetics. That's your MAOA gene that we've just had a look at and you've just watched the video for. What I want you to do then is read the article about deviance and criminalisation and just make notes around this about how it fits with ideas of deviance, crime and social control, and this idea of the social construction of crime. So the article is about homelessness, which most people would consider as a social issue that needs addressing, a social problem that reflects a lack of housing or a lack of support for various groups of individuals. But also homelessness has been through a process of criminalisation. Rough sleeping in certain areas is a criminal activity. Begging on the streets is a criminal activity, so ironically you can actually be fined, I think it's about £100 for begging and things like that. So look at the construction of homelessness. Is it deviant? Is it really criminal? And what elements of social control in terms of formal and informal can you see throughout the article in terms of how homeless people are viewed and how the punishments and retributions are put in place across society. So that takes you to the end of your Introduction to Crime and Deviance booklet. So make sure as well at this point you spend a bit of time doing some revision notes, having a look at the topic 10 mark questions, which you'll find in Teams in the crime section. There's a little tab at the top with all those booklet questions that you can have a look at, and just make sure you're comfortable with how the terminology is defined, because this underpins everything that we are going to start from September when we start looking at the sociological theories of crime and deviance. Any problems, pop a message on Teams or drop me an email.